Fred, so why don't you tell our listeners here what Hooks of Hope's all about?
We want you to join us at Hooks of Hope in helping veterans, children, and families in crisis through destination-style fishing trips, Christian counseling. We have found that this is changing people's lives, but we need you to volunteer time, to volunteer resources if you're a commercial captain, food, accommodations, as well as financial donations. And you can do that by contacting us at www.hooksofhope.org.
Hey guys, welcome to another interview from the Hooks of Hope Tackle Room. Today we have an exceptional guest with us, Major Fred Galvin, retired major in the United States Marine Corps and the founding of the first Marine Special Operations Task Force to deploy into combat in Afghanistan. He's also the author of A Few Bad Men. Fred is also on the board of directors here at Hooks of Hope. He has a remarkable military background. His story is one of resilience, loyalty, and honor in the face of incredible challenges. And we're thrilled to have him here to share his journey and insights with us. Thanks for being here, buddy.
I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, man, came in all the way from Hawaii. It's a long journey. So appreciate it. So, Fred, to start, can you tell everybody a little bit about your background, what led you to join the Marine Corps?
Okay. Well, John, I was a kid about 10 years old, and our family took a trip out here to the East Coast and saw some of these Civil War and Revolutionary War battlefields. I'd never seen or heard anything like that before in my life. It was truly, for me as a 10-year-old kid, it was life-changing. And we'd had these park rangers who would take us and, just give these really impactful accounts of the soldiers that fought and died for our freedom and then to free everyone from oppression. And I just never heard it. So it really changed something in my heart where I wanted to serve, but we didn't have anyone in our family who had. Yeah. So I didn't know the path. But it was later on in high school that there was a fellow classmate who said, hey, well, if you want to join the military, you have to join the Marines. They have a slogan, first to fight. And it really didn't take much convincing for me. I was raised as an athlete and played team sports in high school, and the Marine Corps sounded like it's right up my alley. So it was the easiest recruit that a recruiter could ever do. I went in there and just signed me up, but he said, hey, you're 17. We have to get your parents' consent. And for me, that was just my mom, who was the only parent. And I said, she's not going to sign. I'm not going to be able to do this until I'm 18 years old. And he goes, just leave it to me. And actually, he got her to sign a document. He conned her into saying, this is so that your son can take these tests and maybe he can qualify for a college scholarship. And there's some truth in that,
sure.
But it was really, I was
any and all means to get the guy, right?
Yeah, I was a number to get
meet the quota.
Quota.
Yeah.
But anyway, my mom did raise some hell, and right after that, she knew he wants to join the Marines, and he's going to do it anyway once he becomes 18. So she let me go, and but that young guy that led
and you were
me,
in Kansas City at the time? Is that
Kansas
right?
City, yes.
Yep. Okay.
So on the Kansas side, and then that gentleman, the classmate that led me to understand about the ways of the Marine Corps and introduced me to the recruiter. He had signed up like a year prior, and he's all ready to go, but not quite, because in his heart, something held him back. But he was ready he had a ship date a week after high school graduation, and mine was a few months later in July. So they, that young guy, I won't mention his name, but he went down on spring break to South Padre Island and smoked some dope, and that disqualified him from being in the Marine Corps. So, part of me says that may have been planned, but irregardless, the recruiter said, hey, this guy is not able to ship out for boot camp. Do you want his spot? Because this is going to go a week after high school. I said, for me, it was like a dream come true, John. I was like, absolutely. And, boot camp in the Marine Corps, of course,
Island?
I went to the West Coast where they train the men.
Yep.
And Paris Island, South Carolina at that time, trained the girls as well as some boys.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I went to the
Where was that? It was in Oceanside
It was in
or Camp Pendleton.
the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, which is right next to Lindbergh Field, the airport there.
Sure. Yeah.
And then you have a couple weeks up in Camp Pendleton for rifle range. And then before this, they've changed some things. They used to do some field training in boot camp that we had. Now they have an additional period after boot camp called Marine Combat Training, and all Marines that are not infantry go to that. But for us, it was all right there in boot camp. So, but a lot of people say, boot camp was tough and everything. I absolutely love boot camp. I thrived on it. I was as physically fit as I could ever be at 17 years old, and having just finished that track season, I was loving every bit of it. And I grew up doing martial arts. We had a trampoline in our house, so the peak of fitness. And the Marine Corps is not a joke, but if you are very physically fit and you played football and ran track and lifted weights, you're not going to
you'll be able to get through it.
Challenging.
As long as you have that adventurous spirit, right?
Yeah, and you get to shoot, and it's great.
I always say there's no other job in the world where you're able to do stuff like that.
You get paid.
Yeah, exactly. That's an amazing thing. So what are some of the key experiences early in your career that shaped you as a Marine and as a leader?
That's a good question. So on my very first tour, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and we were actually in camp, or 29 Palms, which is a Marine camp that's out in the middle of the Mojave Desert.
Yep.
And we were there, it was July, it's just boiling hot. And we were out there training for about a month. And Saddam Hussein had invaded, and we came back, and as soon as we came back, they said, we're getting ready to ship out. There's going to be a war. So we loaded up on the ship with the Regimental Landing Team 5. That's a 5th Marine Regiment. The colonel of the infantry regiment, he was the senior Marine on the ship. And we headed out as an amphibious task force, and we offloaded in Jabal Ali, which is a port in Saudi Arabia. And we pushed up to the border between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, and just awaited for the air war to start. But as I wasn't even 21 years old, and I look back now and with fondness, I got to experience some things, getting on a ship, going to different countries that wasn't something that most people from Eastern Kansas had the opportunity to do, and then to actually go into war with a major war that we just pushed through in less than 4 days and devastated the fourth. I think they were the 3rd largest army in the world at that time, the Iraqi army, just decimated them. But through attrition with the air campaign before the ground war started.
So that was your first exposure to combat?
Yes. And it was really something sort of like out of a movie, because you don't see oil fields burning in noon being midnight. It was very surreal. And as soon as we are able to cross what we call the line of departure, the edge of the battlefield, and to go in there, where there's tons of Iraqis prepared, they're already surrendering. So it wasn't as tough of a fight as what some people who trained us. There were Vietnam era Marines. They were fighting in jungles and in places like Khe Sanh and Way City. I'm not saying anything that's untrue. We just didn't have that kind of a high intensity combat urban fighting in Desert Storm that these people who had trained us, our non-commissioned officers, like sergeants and above, many of them had been into serious combat in Vietnam.
Wow. So post that, how long were you there for?
I would say about 7 months. We got there and sat around for a while, and the war kicked off, and we remained in theater reserve in case Saddam tried to do anything tricky, which he didn't. And we just sat there. It was very boring. A lot of people were, hearing all these stories that there's these parades and nobody can buy beer because everybody's buying these Marines free beer. And, everybody, not everybody, but most people had families or girlfriends. And but what happened was there was a massive storm a massive storm that hit Bangladesh, and they sent in the Marines, and that's what ended up having us pulled out of the Persian Gulf to go in, and we delivered humanitarian aid into 2 major cities that were just wiped out. As I was driving up here this morning, I saw some of the tornado damage, just real devastation on the way into town. But these were leveled, like 200,000 civilian, 200,000 people killed in Dhaka and Chittagong, which are cities in Bangladesh. It was serious devastation. We were there for a couple of weeks. We finished our mission, and then we returned back to the United States.
So you were infantry at the time.
I was in Regimental Landing Team 5, which was the 5th Marine Regiment, infantry regiment.
Yep. What led you to Force Recon?
Very good question. So right before we deployed to Desert Storm, I ran into a friend that I knew from high school. He joined the year after I did, and I ran into him in the chow hall, which is like a dining facility on the base.
Sure.
And we asked, I said, are you Justin? He said, are you Fred? And yeah. And we started talking. I started hanging out with him in his barracks, and he was in 1st Recon Battalion. I was like, man, they're super tight. They're totally open and honest to each other. And the mission was just absolutely unbelievable. And they'd tell like what they're doing. And these guys had been in the infantry too, and they came over to Recon Battalion. So I told my friend Justin, I said, I'd love to do this. And he put me in touch with his first sergeant. That led to taking an NDOC. Well, I went to tell my platoon sergeant, who gave me approval to run an NDOC, and I took it the next day and passed it. There was a catch to that my command, I was in a company, and the executive officer looked at that as I was disloyal. Like, what are you doing? Are you trying to get out of this deployment, aren't you? And I wasn't. And I was like, I just want to go to recon, and I'll wait until I got back.
Expand your skills, move, right.
Even after I got back, they put up this firewall, so I was not able to go. And that led me to getting out, immediately going to college, which is something...
Excuse me, sorry.
It's something that my mom had always put in her kids, like, without a college degree, you're not going to be competitive in life, and you need to have a college degree to have a family and to... she saw the future. She had a good vision of where things...
Where'd you go to school, by the way?
California State University at San Marcos.
Okay. All right.
When I say Cal State San Marcos, some people think that's a prison. But and it had just opened up...
Not San Dimas. Not San Quentin. San Marcos.
So it had just opened up, and it was only open when I went to juniors and seniors. So you had to articulate in from somewhere. I had credits from... I went to a private high school in Kansas City, Rockhurst High School. It's where Senator Hawley and Senator Kane went. No relation, or I don't know them, but very good private all-boy Catholic school ran by the Jesuits. And I had a lot of college credits from that because there was a Rockhurst High School and a Rockhurst University. Yeah. So that plus some classes that you could take while you're in the Marine Corps. They also had these CLEP tests, college-level entrance programs. So bottom line, and then I was searching for a school that would accept the maximum number of credits that I could, and I went to Cal State San Marcos, and in 1 year, I got a double major in history and in social science, and that's real. I could show you the credentials, unlike Joe Biden, but I did get through there in January 1993, finished in December 1993, and I just wanted to go back in the Marines. But I knew, because my mom was like, you need to go to college, and I really didn't. I didn't have a passion to. I love studying history because, of our tours around the United States, and I fell in love with that.
They're highly correlated.
So I tried to go back in the Marine Corps, but the problem is I met a gal I fell in love with, ended up marrying her. It's unfortunate. She was like a Newport Beach bunny. I'm not going to have anything to do with a Marine. Her dad was in the Marines. But
it's never happened to a Marine before, right?
No. And it happens almost inevitably. Yeah. So she was the one that I made a mistake with. And but these career recruiters came on campus, and I listened to them, and I was eager to look at different opportunities. And this recruiter from a penny stock firm called Chatfield Dean came there, and he talked about how you can make all this money. It was kind of a sweatshop, I'll admit.
Sure.
So I went there very briefly.
That's what got you into financial services. It got at least piqued your interest in that.
Yeah.
And kind of got you exposed.
I was a rookie stockbroker at Chatfield Dean in La Jolla, California. Yeah. Immediately after, I was only there a couple months, and then transitioned to, by the grace of God, was able to get on with Smith Barney. And at that time, they were the largest firm on Wall Street by assets under management, number of analysts, and it was a great firm. You may have heard the commercial. They make money the old-fashioned way. They earn it.
Of course, sure.
So I was with them, and in 1995, so I'd been there just a little bit less than 2 years, I decided I really had this passion because whenever my friends would call, and I'd be a rookie broker just prospecting for new accounts, but when buddies would call me and tell me what they're doing in the Marines, that still led my passion.
Yeah, that's where your heart was, right?
I wanted to serve, and although I loved finance, it was very interesting, exciting, but my heart was back in the Marine Corps. Yep. So I actually went to San Diego, and I was back at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot, and I ran into this recruiter at the barbershop, and he said, "Hey, you really disappointed me because here's this sergeant who ran a 300 or perfect physical fitness test. Yeah. We set you all up for officer candidate school, and then you turned it down." And the reason is he was very, very blunt. He said, "It's the needs of the Marine Corps." Basically, like what you heard when you were enlisted, that it's an open contract, meaning you don't have any say. The Marine Corps assigns you. And that's not what he was telling me the first time was not exactly true, because you compete and they break your class into top, middle, and bottom thirds, and you compete for your jobs. Yeah. And there was certain jobs I didn't want to do in the Marine Corps. And I really wanted to accomplish that dream that I originally had, which I had not been fulfilled, of going into reconnaissance.
Yeah, so special operations, right?
Yeah, so I had to, I joined back up, and they sent me to officer candidate school, and then after that, you're selected and you're commissioned. Then you go to 6 months of the basic officer course where you learn the basics of infantry tactics, and this is all in Quantico, Virginia. And then I was able to compete and selected for an infantry officer. And you have to be in the infantry at that time to go to force reconnaissance as an officer, as a platoon commander. And there are 3 force recon companies in the Marine Corps. Yeah. Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, Camp Pendleton, California, and Okinawa, Japan. Yeah. And
first is Pendleton, second's Lejeune, and then
third is
Okinawa.
In Okinawa. Yeah. And they have recon battalions and force recon companies at that time, and they were separate organizations. And the only difference is in Okinawa, they had 3rd Recon Battalion and 5th Force Recon Company. In order to try out for those 5 spots in the East or West Coast as platoon commanders, or only 3 in Okinawa, I mean, there's extreme competition. I mean, it's just immeasurable. And you literally have to be as focused as an Olympic athlete. I didn't say, you're the decathlete or you won a gold medal, but if you get off path, if you get injured, if it's not the right timing, you will likely not be able to fulfill that dream. So going into officer candidate school and the basic school, that's all I was so focused on, not just infantry, but infantry was a requirement to get into force recon. Yeah. Went to force recon, but it was in Okinawa. So I left Camp Pendleton, California, where I served as my platoon commander tour as a young infantry officer, 2nd lieutenant, 1st lieutenant. Went over to Okinawa to 5th Force Recon Company, and I've met a lot of the men. I've introduced you to a few and talked to a few. These just exceptional Marines.
O.C. Fagan, we've had here.
That's right.
With you, right?
He was a recon Marine, and he was in a sister platoon we call on the same deployment on the group of ships. They call the group of ships that deploy that are amphibious ships, Marine Expeditionary Unit. We did 2 back-to-back deployments on those, and he was on one of the recon platoon while we were the force recon platoon on the same Marine Expeditionary Unit. He was great Marine. He trained with us during certain periods, and the recon platoon will generally provide what we call the green side reconnaissance. So they'll be in the bush or in the jungle, a couple periods of darkness ahead of time, getting the pattern of life, reporting the information back, clear, crisp communication so we can go in and do a precision raid. Is what the force recon platoon on ships is the assault element for what a greater picture back then. They called the Maritime Special Purpose Force. Now it's called the Maritime Raid Force. I was the platoon commander of that force recon platoon that did the precision raids, and we would do these raids on land at targets either in the jungle or an urban environment, or we do them at sea, what we call visit board search and seizure, which is also a raid, but it's at sea, and it's
on boats.
The most complex environment you as a fisherman. You understand
Absolutely.
multiple moving three-dimensional platforms, not just on the surface of the water, but you have shouldering ships where snipers are at. You have Huey helicopters that have another airborne sniper.
Right.
And
Super tight quarters and moving dynamics. Like
Yes.
as a shooter, you know,
everything's moving three-dimensionally.
It's difficult.
Pitch,
I mean,
yaw.
I'm an avid enthusiast and shooting and that kind of thing. And it's, I can imagine how difficult that would be.
Plus, there's
especially in tight quarters.
in the approach to the ship, there is no cover. There's
Yeah.
nothing to get behind.
Right.
You're in open ocean,
Right.
being pushed around, and there's a point of no return because some of our tactics, without getting deep into it, you know, you have attack helicopters, the AH-1 Whiskey Cobra helicopter, and they can fire the 20 millimeter guns, and they can fire non-incendiary weapons such as the flechette rocket. It said it's like 2,200 nails, so it doesn't burn the ship. But we get to a certain point, it's a point of no return when you get belt buckle close to that vessel, the target vessel. They're basically weapons tight and they can't fire. So these are very complicated missions, and I just was scratching the surface, but we board the ship multiple methods, sometimes top down with a helicopter fast roping onto the ship, sometimes with a telescopic painter pole and a grappling hook and doing what we call hook and climb from a rigid hull inflatable boat, sometimes simultaneous with different echelons.
How big of ships are we talking?
So good question. We would train on these Navy ships that would have these massive, we'd climb sometimes a multi-pitch climb like 40 feet. And, you know, you'd slide down. Some of them would have cranes. So you'd slide down a rope like 50 feet to get around a crane.
Yeah.
But we hadn't done one of these force recon platoons prior to me getting in force recon. Hadn't done one since Desert Storm. And fast forwarding a few years later, in our deployment in 2003 and 2004, I was on a fast forward there. I was at First Force Recon also as a platoon commander, and that wasn't normal at that time. And to go from going from when the Patriots were world champs to the Chiefs, and you know you're playing with two world championship teams. But in 2003 and 2004, I was a platoon commander at First Force Recon in Camp Pendleton, California, and you know we took down 36 of these ships in the Northern Arabian Gulf, Gulf of Oman, Gulf of Aden. They're moving material and personnel illegally onto the Saudi Arabian Peninsula to get the jihad going. So, but we take down ships, to answer your question. Some were fairly large. The majority were these wooden dowels, like in the time of Christ. They're just, and we got on one, as I was mentioned before this recording, it was an engineering casualty. The rudder was broken, and it was just being tossed around at sea like a rag doll, and we all got sick except for one of our warriors.
Happens to everyone.
Yeah, this
happens to the best of us.
Sergeant was just tough as nails, and he still is. But we board these things, which sometimes you would do a hook and climb on, but sometimes you could just jump right over onto. We did non-compliant boardings where the ship is not stopping, but we never did an opposed boarding. We were prepared to do that where they have active measures where, whether it's concertina wire or using water cannon or a weapon, they never did that. But obviously when we present that package of a USS, a cruiser normally is what we had as the shouldering ship. I mean, this is, they got 5-inch cannon and then you have Cobra attack helicopters. They know the gig's up. And
it motivates non-resistance, right?
Yeah, and they have Huey helicopter with sniper. So we never had an opposed boarding. And, other than you've seen in the movie, forget the name of the captain, the Navy SEALs kicked in. Yeah, that was Captain Phillips. That was an actual opposed boarding that they used a shouldering ship to take the sniper shots and performed it very well, but we were prepared to do that. Anyway, very, very complex missions, and you have to train in that was perfect starting point for me, because going into Force Recon in Okinawa, we didn't have any married people in our platoon at that time. You were forward deployed. It's a very Spartan environment, and it was really a pleasure to serve with this. That's why, honestly, of all the different units I've served in the Marine Corps, I feel most fondly about something about Marines from Camp Schwab, Okinawa, because there's zero distractions. It is the 21st century Sparta, and that's literally the agoge for the Marine Corps, because there's nothing to be distracted on, and you're focusing on protecting and fighting for our nation. It was a really awesome experience.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So that was 2004?
So 2003 and 2004 is when we were doing visit board search and seizure missions. We did 36. We also pushed into Iraq, and then we got back on the boat, and we actually did more visit VBSS, visit board search and seizure. And then we actually went into Jordan, we went into United Arab Emirates, Qatar. We did some training missions, and then in 2004, we went back home. And the Marine Corps is a small force, not like the Army that occupies. And we thought that we were going to reset and continue to do these deployments on the ships, which is what the Marines' bread and butter primary mission is to be this amphibious force in readiness off the coast, ready to push ashore like a 911 force at any time and any place. But what had happened, John, is the Pentagon decided, hey, we need more forces. We're going to stabilize. We're going to do stability operations in Iraq. And not only had that been the second Force Recon unit I was in, and I did 3.5 years in Okinawa before as a Force Recon platoon commander. And before these 2 ship deployments, we did all these exercises in 16 different countries, just being gone for like 3 to 4 weeks, which was incredible, working with those countries' elite units in training in jungles and mountain and Arctic, and doing high altitude parachuting operations, diving. It was just...
Just curious, how many high altitude jumps did you do?
You know, I don't have my jump log, and actually I've been retired.
Enough to not know?
Enough to not know, because just next month will be my 11th year since I took the uniform off. And I know you and I have talked before, and you're like, how are you so chill? I'm like, that's no longer a part of my life. This is not normally an identity that it's not attached to my persona. I don't forget if somebody asked me, but it's not what I live. So I don't carry around a logbook. I don't wear the T-shirts. You never see me with a bumper sticker or a bag that says anything. But we would go to these countries, and before we start training with bilateral or multinational exercises, sometimes we would do those with the host nation, but we would always do our own training ahead of time and get our knees in the breeze and log in probably like 20 to 25 jumps, day and night, low altitude, high altitude, high opening, high altitude, low opening, just to check all the blocks for currency in case we had to. There was a certain threat that we had to be prepared for at that time, and it's not the threat that we face now, but we had to be able to fly in planes above the double-digit surface-to-air missile range, like the double-digit SAMs, and avoid not just the height, but offset. So we were off the coast. So when you jump in at night, like 25,000 feet, 40 kilometers off a coast at night before moonrise, it's just, you're jumping out into complete abyss, utter blackness. You don't see anything. And
you're wearing NVGs and
you wear NVGs, and when you get under canopy, you pop down a compass board. It has a Ritchie compass and a GPS. And, you know, if you...
Garmin GPS? Just curious. Were you using Garmin's?
We had, at that time...
Some sort of special made ones for you guys?
I think they were... No. At first, we just started out with an old, very thick, hardened military brand called the Plugger. And then we moved to the Garmin's. But you have radios, and you're talking to everybody, especially in case you're over water. If you land, you could be lost at night. You have strobe lights with infrared, just in case.
That would enable you to achieve quite a bit of an element of surprise, right? I mean, you're going to get in there unseen, and
because you're going in,
they're not spotting the plane at radar, right?
A Force Recon platoon is a very small element, and they're made to go behind enemy lines doctrinally, 300 kilometers behind enemy lines, and your only backup is missiles and close air support. Something off the rail of an aircraft or something fired off of a Navy ship, or a subsurface vessel. And that's the only thing that's the cavalry.
Yeah.
You have to be prepared to go in there, and we would do these profiles. You go deep behind enemy lines, 10-day patrols. You're sending this information and imagery back. Back then, not everybody had satellite radios like we do now.
Yeah.
Now the technology's much more advanced, and it's much more reliable, because we used to have to use, our bread and butter was the high frequency radio, HF radio, and it's a little bit trickier, but now I would say it's a little bit easier.
Stuff's come a long way. So you were a part of the historic inception of MARSOC, which is the Marine Corps' Forces Special Operations Command. Can you share with us what that experience was like and what MARSOC represents to you?
Yes. So very interesting question, because I'll go over some highlights, because this could be a long story, as you know.
Yeah.
We, the Marine Corps was ordered with all the other services by Dr. Rumsfeld in 2001, right after 9/11, to increase the capacity of all the services Special Operations Force. And the Marine Corps hadn't participated in that. We kept our own elite. Force Recon was the equivalent of the Green Berets and Navy SEALs and Army Rangers and Air Force Special Operations. But the Marine Corps being so small, we didn't want to give that up so that the Marine Corps wouldn't have its own eyes and ears behind enemy lines. So we did our operations strictly for the Marine Corps units prior to the inception of MARSOC, instead of a joint force working for the Army or the Navy. Yep. And there was a lot of resistance. Rumsfeld continually said this, and the Pentagon hedged its bets. Now, Rumsfeld was the Secretary of Defense, and he had previously been the Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam era at the tail end of the Vietnam War, and he was a naval officer. He had he knew the capabilities of elite special operations units in guerrilla operations and counter-guerrilla operations. So he wanted more capacity to fight Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And so everybody else expanded Special Operations Force. The Marine Corps, they kind of tried to appease him by sending a few officers down to Tampa at the U.S. Special Operations Command. And that didn't meet Rumsfeld's goal. So he said, I need you to get together. They did a proof of concept to further slow roll, thinking that Bush 43 would be like his father, who was a one-term president. Well, they were hedging and they lost. And Bush 43 got reelected, kept Rumsfeld initially as his Secretary of Defense. And Rumsfeld not only said, thou shalt create this force, he actually officiated it when they activated, he was the godfather of this arranged marriage, and I was actually the love child of this arranged marriage between the United States Marine Corps and the U.S. Special Operations Command and the very first unit. So I was the founder.
Selected for that?
Good question. My honest opinion, and this isn't like trying to intentionally be self-depreciating, but they were looking for a major who had combat experience, who knew Force Recon in and out. I was one of, there were supposed to be only 2 majors at 1st Force Recon in Camp Pendleton. I was one of 3, because at the time we had a 3rd one, and we were about ready to go back to Iraq on another subsequent deployment. I was with my girlfriend at the time in Hilo, Hawaii, and I came back, she lived in the country, and listened to my voicemail, and they said, hey, congratulations. My peers were saying, like, this is some good deal to be a part of an organization. We heard this was standing up, but this was in North Carolina, and none of us wanted to go to North Carolina.
Yeah.
But instead of contacting me first, they cooked this deal up and sold it to the CO, because these gentlemen both had kids, both married, homes. They weren't ready to leave sunny Southern California and pick up and go to the swamp in Camp Lejeune. So I got the honor of doing that. I don't think it was due to my prowess or anything, being the biggest, boldest, barrel-chested guy. It was because other people didn't want it. Now, I also say that seriously because a lot of my contemporaries had been shot and wounded, and it takes a toll after this point, like 5 years at war, and There's a lot of divorce. It's difficult.
Yeah.
And I'm not
divorce can be in the special operations community. The divorce rate's about 90%.
Yeah. And as an officer, you are doing the missions in Force Recon. It's different than in Recon Battalion where the teams go out in Recon Battalion. In Force Recon, the platoon goes out. You go out as an officer. So you are doing the training, but you're planning and coordinating all that, which is a very lengthy process because everything involves aviation, involves supporting arms from artillery, sometimes naval ships, aviation assets. It's very extensive, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a toll on the human body and then the mind, which a lot of the younger Marines, they have specialties with weapons and communication, but this not thus all-encompassing. They always know the officer's always in these meetings nonstop, and then even after it's over, you're doing the requirements, requesting all this stuff. It's very, very time-intensive. Yeah. And but a lot of people, I say that as background because a lot of people, would get married by the time they're major and wanted out of it. It was too much. Yeah. So I was one of the few, and they picked me, and I had considerable experience. Nobody else had done 2 long tours as a Force Recon platoon commander, nor had as many combat deployments at that time. And I'm not boasting this, just I intentionally was trying to stay under the radar because I really loved Force Recon. And I knew that was detrimental to my military career as an infantry officer to go over to Force Recon. They've warned us since our initial training to not do what I was doing.
What were some of the biggest challenges that you and your fellow Raiders faced with MARSOC as you were, 1, forming it, standing it up, and then 2, integrating it into the special operations community?
I could take all night, but I'll just boil it down real quickly. So when they created MARSOC, the amount of Force Recon Marines across the Marine Corps at that time was 300. And they created this 2,600-man organization called MARSOC. They created it out of what was called the 4th Marine Expeditionary Brigade. And that started out years prior as some high-speed anti-terrorism brigade. And it was supposed to be like super high speed for the Marine Corps. Yep. But eventually it became literally a dumping ground of people who were non-deployable, either physically, that these other organizations across Camp Lejeune didn't want, so they would put them in 4th MEB, which Marine Expeditionary Brigade. People didn't want these guys. And these are people that really enjoyed not deploying, and they were not going to help you out. However, when we first formed up, I was given the marching orders that we're going to deploy in 11 months. We didn't know where. They just said, you're going to deploy with the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit, which was a group of Marines going out on the 3 Navy ships, heading to who knows where, but likely going through Europe and into the Middle East. Because the war was going on. We were going to deploy in January 2007. But there was a lot of resistance, John. People didn't want to have any capital expenditures with any building development, no infrastructure. We were living out of trailers, working. They didn't want to give weapons. There was a lot of resistance to putting any sunk cost permanently into the ground and doing anything. And I was part of these early meetings. I felt it. I believe they just wanted this administration to get over at that time, which was Bush administration, and just to scuttle it. That was the feeling we got. And there was many in the Special Operations Command that would be like bringing your girlfriend home to meet your wife, that, here's the Green Berets, and now you have these Marines in the Special Operations community. So the Army Special Operations Command is actually spelt ARMY. So they're the big dogs, 25,000 special operators there, and we have 2,000. So, but they didn't want these very hungry. That's one thing about the Marine Corps is we will get by on a shoestring budget. It's just like a startup organization, and this was the startup of startups. Yeah. Marine Corps is a pure startup. We will do everything with less. And this organization, which, I'd say, hey, these are all program record. We could get binocular night vision. We could get these new weapons that everybody was like resistance to taking anything, because then that would sort of solidify and pour the concrete and let it settle. So there was just a ton of resistance. But also, when we went forward, they knew that, hey, you guys are going to get off the ship. That's actually what General Brown, who is the general in charge of the U.S. Special Operations Command, said at our activation ceremony. When you cross the parallel, he said the parallel, I forget it at this time, but it was right there at the Suez Canal. He goes, you're going to be employed by the Special Operations Command Central, the Special Operations Commander in charge of all Middle East operations. So I knew we're getting off this ship. And so I was begging every day, every single day since our activation, to answer 3 questions. And I had a list drawn up of personnel by rank, by the quantity, and by their occupation, because I realized we were so tactically prepared for that fight when we went in, but we just didn't have the manpower to support it.
Yeah.
And there was so much resistance. So when you ask the questions, this is like the whole entire organization, our higher headquarters, did every single thing, and they denied it, but you can see, and you can ask any of the early Marine special operators, there was 100% resistance from the top. They wouldn't even give us a logistician to order food, and that, of course, is critical when you're in one of the most austere environments in eastern Afghanistan, right there in the Tora Bora Mountains in the wintertime.
Yeah.
You have to be able to have some ability to self-sustain. But to not have anybody to repair vehicles, weapons, radios, optics, you're going to go dead in the water so fast.
Did you find that resistance motivated you?
The resistance, at first is demoralizing, and you know it, but if you are the actual founder and the weight's on your shoulders, you can't let that get to you. You have to fight with everything you have. And some people have asked me through the years, like, hey, when you were on trial with this court case, how did you continue? And it's the same, I hate saying the father figure, but the older brother, if whatever you want to call it, but as the founder, you can't sit there and I'd gone through so many of these military schools, and one of them was this course called the Mountain Leaders Course. And you're up in the mountains, you're doing Arctic work, and if you go what we call going internal and start thinking about yourself, it happens quick and you will get defeated. And some of that training, but also like as a Christian, I knew like you have to be, as the leader, your focus has to be completely outward. It cannot be on you. And we have a saying in the Marine Corps, leaders eat last. And that, it's always supposed to be that our Marines come first,
yep.
that we'll die for our Marines.
Yeah.
And Chesty Puller is one of the most famous Marines in the Marine Corps. He had 10-to-1 odds. There's 10 Chinese infantry divisions against the 1st Marine Division in the frozen Chosin Reservoir. It was so cold up there in Korea in the Korean War that they couldn't even have their weapons fire. I mean, it was just horrible odds.
Yeah.
But he was very proud that his officers who led from the front, they had a 2-to-1 ratio. They were wounded twice as high as the enlisted Marines. But I had that same, those forefathers set that impression into us that as a leader, that's your family. And family is really big to me. Your family has to be the ones, if you're in charge, you have to not just provide, and I did everything I could, but if people aren't going to give it to you, you have to protect and you have to fight as hard as you can for them.
Yeah, totally.
And that was, what kept me going during combat operations, as well as the following war crimes trial that we went through.
What were some of the toughest missions you guys dealt with when prior to your trial?
Well, prior to the trial, since we were the very first Marine Special Operations Task Force, predating that was Force Recon.
Yeah.
And those combat missions were, besides the ones I mentioned, which were the most complex and sophisticated out at sea, which some of the Marines didn't want to do that because Iraq was going on at the time, and they got to go into Iraq, and then we got to do more ship seizures afterwards. Yeah. But then they look back and they're like, those are some of the most dynamic, and because everything is changing so fast.
Tough
like
stuff.
If you're hitting a target on land, that building's not moving, and everything is, you can focus the geometries of fires, especially with aviation aircraft and airborne snipers. It's much more stable because the ship doesn't turn.
Right.
But on land, we had our bread and butter switched from doing reconnaissance. We were doing much more precision raids in Iraq, basically night after night, sometimes multiple ones at night, sometimes ones where you'd hit a house and the high value target is not there or is moving and you're hitting subsequent houses. Sometimes I know one time in the 440 district of Husayba, which is far western Iraq, an area that Saddam Hussein could not even tame. In the infantry battalion had a lot of, they were just having a toughest time as you can imagine. They're basically sitting hunkered down on their base. We said, where is the absolute worst area in Husayba? Where is it? And they said, well, it's the 440 district of Husayba. Like, it's just, we're going to get killed. We go in there and we developed a plan. And I was the Force Recon Platoon Commander, the active duty. We had a reserve platoon, and they went with us on this mission, Marine reservists. So we had amphibious assault vehicles which go across the sea, but it land there in Iraq, landlocked country. We pushed from the north, and we had the Amtraks on one side, up-armored Humvees on another side, tanks on another side, and we just pushed. We cleared like 200 buildings that night, and that's a lot of buildings for a 25-man platoon, and then another sister recon platoon. And a lot of mainly explosive breaching. We wanted to show not just the enemy, but the infantry platoon that we don't care what you think. We will take care of every single terrorist, and we will go through the center, the heart of darkness. And we also had this deception operations 5 minutes into the attack as we were pushing north to south. We dropped a 500-pound bomb from an F-18 south of the city in the desert there, and it really shook the enemy. And you have to think, innovation is not just something in Silicon Valley or Boston. It's something that's on the battlefield. It's very dynamic, and you don't have a lot of time to plan. And when you go against an enemy who has a vote, and it's not just one little guy. There's multiple echelons, but that was one of many. Night after night, we were doing missions just like that, where you're just shaking up the enemy. We had other situations, where we were surrounded by the enemy. We knew we were compromised. We were on a cliff face, and just like I'd read stories when I was a young Marine in Okinawa. You have some time because you're waiting for planes to take you to these other countries to do this training. They used to have these novels that were written about the Marine Force Recon platoons in Vietnam that were surrounded by like a battalion worth of North Vietnamese Army regulars, and they were just calling in artillery and airstrikes, danger close to themselves, and sometimes they'd be all killed.
Yeah.
But we didn't have it as gruesome as some of the guys did in Vietnam, but it was very tough times. You had to use your mind, and I was fortunate enough in between these two tours with Force Recon, I had a tour as an instructor at the Marine Corps' Aviation Center of Excellence, the equivalent of Top Gun or the Air Force's Red Flag. And I was an instructor that taught helicopter raids and close air support, calling in the airstrikes. And that got me so used to calling in airstrikes as well as knowledgeable of these joint aviation platforms that did a lot of things that I can't talk to you about. But it gave us incredible capabilities. It was a huge edge, not just on the enemy, but the regular Marine infantry had no knowledge of all of these types of capabilities. But again, that led to so much extra planning and request. So as an officer, you're doing the training before missions, you're doing the briefing to the staff, you have to do the coordination, and then after you pull these bad guys off the target, you're doing, exploitation of that, and you have to type up it's
a lot of work.
If you I earned a title called Filthy Fred because you're lucky to get 1 or 2 hours of sleep, and that's really bad on your mind to sustain that for 7 months straight, where night after night, if there's a mission, if a drone spots somebody offloading rockets or about ready to drop our artillery rounds in a hole that are going to be used to blow up Marines on a roadside bomb, we were going out there to kill somebody. And it was a smorgasbord, just too many missions, not enough time. And we're, just like I told my commanding officer who was there, we have to do every single thing we can because the Marine Corps and the U.S. forces were getting killed at a very high rate in 2004. We were there 2003, 2004, and 2005.
So in your book, A Few Bad Men, you detail a really very challenging period where you and your team faced significant scrutiny and accusations following a complex mission in Afghanistan. Could you tell us more about this experience, and then also what motivated you to write the book?
Yeah, I could tell. And to keep it as brief as possible, we were falsely accused of mass murdering civilians, and it was on our 30th mission. We'd been in Afghanistan for only a month. We had good intelligence, and the U.S. had paved a highway, the first paved highway in Afghanistan that connected the capitals of Afghanistan and Pakistan. But what it did, John, is it allowed the importation of freedom fighters or jihadists, foreign fighters that were getting radicalized in Pakistan. And instead of coming over these 14,000 feet snow-covered peaks, they're just coming right across the border. And also, there was a government agency that was supposed to be doing poppy eradication. And I won't get too deep into this, but they were basically teaching them crop rotation and exponentially, just 100x growing poppy, which was being exported to fund terrorism.
Yeah.
And this started the forever war. Plus, at that time, this was during the Bush administration, whose vice president was Cheney. I'm sure you can connect these dots. But what we had was a situation where in 2006, General Petraeus and General Mattis came together and developed this joint doctrine called the counterinsurgency doctrine. And this basically changed the rules of engagement from where we had intelligence and we could go action it and capture or kill high-value leaders, to now we have to sit down and drink some chai and get to know the environment, and it was totally opposite. So this
was a public relations campaign, right?
Exactly. This is a civil affairs poison pill, the start of the forever war, to never leave. And as you've seen all these generals that left as 4-star general, if you retire out of the Pentagon as a 4-star general, or out of Tampa down in the Special Operations Command or the Central Command in charge of all the Middle East operations, in your 4 stars, you have access and placement to the Pentagon, to the right people in the House and Senate Armed Services Committee. And these people in uniform are begging to stay the course, to keep the funds going and stay in Iraq and Afghanistan as long as possible. But with this as the background, we went into this village and we got attacked on all sides. We got hit with a car bomb, and immediately we got attacked on our left flank. We made quick work out of them. Our Marines aimed in, fired. One of them who you met, he fired very boldly, without any hesitation. A very young man shouldered his light machine gun, aimed in, and just made quick work. The driver of that vehicle ditched out and continued to fight us from a ditch. We never killed him, but he did testify from an American base in our trial, or war crimes tribunal, that a year after, and he demanded justice and compensation again. And he'd been paid for the 3 people in his truck that were firing AK-47s at us, aiming straight in at that vehicle, that Humvee of ours that was hit with the car bomb. But we killed all of them that were shooting at us from that vehicle. We started receiving fire, not just from this dry riverbed on our right flank, but from a hilltop where snipers fired, and they dragged a vehicle across the road, blocking us in. A mob swarmed at us. So it was a very complicated, coordinated ambush that was there. And the gentleman that the prosecution...
If I remember correctly, in your book, you said it was one of the largest IED blasts that you had ever seen.
Definitely. And it scorched the trees over 100 feet in there. I mean, this was... Up to that point, they'd used a lot of shrapnel with high explosives, and the high explosives blast that energy and pushes that shrapnel, sometimes fist size, into human body. But they also did things with flammable, putting a spark. And psychologically, it's worse when people get burned and you hear the voice, the inhuman voice of Americans, your buddy screaming as his skin's melting. And that unfortunately happened to some of the Marine Raiders that I had known subsequently. God rest and God bless them. But they knew what they were doing, and they wanted to inflict max casualties, and we were combating that with trying to win hearts and minds. That's where many of these Marines are having problems, and they have these scars in their minds because they had their hands tied and their legs tied by our own leaders, our generals, and our congressmen and women that were coming up with these ridiculous rules that were very profitable to the big businesses that are in the war machine. So, but that was a very complicated mission. We did fight our way out of it, We didn't kill any civilians. This happened at 9 o'clock in the morning. I was on the patrol. I saw it. We all came back, and 20 minutes later, this was out on the international media, and it just started a dogpile and snowball that all these media sources said it. Then they started protesting and rioting in the streets. They had the governor of that province, as well as the president of Afghanistan, condemn us publicly. Immediately, our American generals buckled and kicked us out. And then you saw the entire chain of command from the American colonel that owned that battle space making public statements to the U.S. Pentagon's press corps saying this was a terrible, terrible mistake. This is a stain on our honor, that innocent Afghan civilians were killed by Americans. And you had the commandant of the Marine Corps who made a statement to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who at that time was General Frank Pace. General Frank Pace had a press conference, and he said the commandant was very disappointed in the conduct of those Marines. You had our commanding general of the Marine Special Operations Command go up and testify before the House Armed Services Committee. And Adam Smith, who received his testimony from General Halleck, our commanding general, he said at a minimum, these reports, that was excessive force. So you had members of Congress, you had our general in charge of us, you had the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, the commandant of the Marine Corps, you even had the sergeant major of the Marine Corps on the day of his retirement make a disparaging comment in the media. And so your entire chain of command, and you don't feel like anyone has your back at all. And that starts to break your mindset down, even though that you've done all these missions for years and years in combat, Iraq, Afghanistan. But there was one man, God rest his soul, he was a man of God, Congressman Walter B. Jones from the 2nd District of North Carolina. He stood up, just like the scripture says, before we knew him, he knew us. Yeah. And he stood up in front of the House of Representatives, and he was the longest serving member of the House Armed Service Committee, but he stood up and said, these Marines' rights have been maligned. Why do these Marines not have the presumption of innocence? And he heard all these comments in the press by all these senior officers, to include Marine officers, to include our own commanding general. But very quickly, the Army generals shut up and didn't say anything else, which they'd been writing articles in the Washington Post. They were quoted, I should say. And then they had the commandant of the Marine Corps made a statement 2 days after Walter Jones said that, and said, nobody should be making any comments. And it's like, well, you did. You made comments. So, but basically, that's why I'm so adamant about, and I believe God has allowed this to happen in my life, so I firsthand experience these injustices of when somebody does not have the presumption of innocence, and when they have been maligned by somebody slandering them, when there is no proof, when there's been no investigation. And, having gone through that, I, have a strong passion to help people out that can't defend themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I having known you, I see that in you. So what, that was a harrowing chapter in your life, man. I mean, that was a very traumatic event, right? Mm-hmm. And I can only imagine all of the different feelings and experiences and such that you had going on internally while going through that. What do you think, what were some of the biggest things that helped drive you to get through that?
Good question. So when I was a young kid, I'd always sought the Lord, and it was something like just the seeking of God, just knowing, like, for me, God was real, and I was blessed to live in a very open area that had tons of nature, and just being able to explore nature and be close to God and seeking God. It says you will find Him, and so that was in me from a very young age. At like 13 years old, yep. And I had good opportunities when I was a young teenage kid, to get into a church. And, there was this Christian television station, and they had a natural bodybuilder, and I was really inspired by that. So I really got head and heels. I got accepted Jesus as my Savior and got into a really good church. And, sometimes in the Marine Corps, my walk was up and down, but combat, really did focus me in. And I'm not saying I was perfect and, like the best saint in the world, because I wasn't. That would not be true. But these things have happened, whether it's combat, as I described in Iraq, or at sea. They started, my first thing in my mission preparation was prayer. And maybe not everybody was, but like the last sentence I wrote in that book is true. And, it's God has enabled me to bring everybody home. Yeah. That's not my prowess. That's divine. When you do that many deployments, that many missions on these deployments, and just like David, and I'm going to read a scripture that's very important in my life, because David was very important to me as he fought the nation's enemies. Yeah. He fought his own government and his own family. But I want to read this scripture from the 9th Psalm, chapter 9 and verses 9 and 10, where it says, "The Lord is refuge to the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. Those who know your name trust in you. For you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you." And no matter what you're going through, and I've seen guys, who are multiple amputations, third-degree burns over 90% of their body, terrible wounds. But God is there. God will comfort and protect you. And ultimately, we will be with him.
That's right.
And it's, truly amazing that no matter what you're going through in your life, and in a situation where it seems like people are coming at you from all sides, to have that strength and, to have not just the strength of God, but to have that peace. I get emotional because I know the power of God. And
it's amazing.
When I see like how David was, that's,
I see a lot of him and you, man.
That's the food.
It's, when you pulled up Psalm 9, I happened to pull up on my phone.
Oh, yeah.
Another thing from the Psalms, but it's Psalm 91.
Oh, yeah.
And, when I see, I've known you for a while now, and I've read your book, and I've met guys you've served with, and the one thing that I constantly hear from them, right, is that you were different. You were set apart. Yeah. You were selfless. You had a command about you that the others just didn't. That you put them first,
right?
And you see that they saw that both in combat, and then also, as you went through these trials and tribulations with that trial.
Yes.
You knew exactly. You strategically worked your way through on who are they going to go at the hardest to try to get to me, and that's who we need to protect.
Right.
Right. And you did that, which was a completely selfless act. Like you were up against some serious odds, but the Almighty protected you, man. Yes. I firmly believe you were set apart, bro.
Yeah.
Not just from a redemptive and a salvation standpoint, but you were set apart and given a unique set of skills, temperament, spirit, leadership, all that enables others to see God through you and in you. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
It is an amazing thing. But Psalm 91 is whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. And I will say to the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness will be your shield and your rampart. You will not fear the terror in the night, nor allow the arrow that flies by the day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys the midday. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 may at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will not only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked, if you say the Lord is my refuge, and you make the Most High your dwelling, no harm will overtake you, no disaster will come near your tent. And for He will command His angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. You will tread on the lion and the cobra. You will trample the great lion and the serpent. Because He loves me, says the Lord, I will rescue him. I will protect him, for He acknowledges my name. Yeah. He will call on me, and I will answer him, and I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life, I will satisfy him and show him my salvation.
Yeah. It's true. And I didn't just reflect on those prior to combat. You know, that's what gave us comfort, gave me the peace. And I am a regular guy from Eastern Kansas, and you know, I very aware when people tell me after different missions just how fearful, you know, like we were going into places that you're surrounded, a small force, and
facing death every single day.
We would go into these towns that were, even the infantry battalion that had occupied it had withdrawn, and they said, "Don't go in that town; you'll get killed." They had all these casualties. They got armor-piercing rounds, and you just, like I was telling a sister in Christ 2 days ago, like you cannot live with that fear.
Yeah.
And one thing I regret is, and I didn't know because it was my very first war crimes trial, although I did go to another one. But I said after that trial, because I didn't know how it would go, and it was the longest trial in Marine Corps history, 3.5 weeks in the courtroom, but that we would never fight in a defense before as an infantryman. It's defense is stronger.
Yeah.
And there's a time and a place for that. But when you are innocent and they're accusing, you know, I wanted it to be done differently. And then, you know, some people may think I'm crazy, but as soon as we were cleared, I went back overseas to Okinawa, Japan, where I first started in the recon community. And from there, I went back to Afghanistan, the very first opportunity that there was. But we had a commanding officer. I was his operations officer in 3rd Recon Battalion. He was doing some things that were flat out immoral. He's dropping the highest level of ordnance within distances that were 5 times inside the acceptable fratricide distance of, instead of 180 meters, our Marines were at 34 meters away.
Jeez.
And he dropped
That's danger close at that point.
It's inside danger close.
Yeah.
And it was not just reckless, it was against regulations. But we had other weapons, but he chose the highest yielding, 500-pound bomb, because I was a weapons guy that taught this out as an instructor at the Marine Corps' Aviation Center of Excellence. 500-pound bomb is a 50-50 mix of 250 pounds of high explosive ordnance surrounded by 250 pounds of steel. The blast is shrapnel. But we had other weapons, laser-guided munitions that were on 2 different platforms that could be fired. One had a 4-pound high explosive shape charge. The shape charge uses overpressure to kill. It doesn't blast shrapnel 3-dimensionally. Another had 4, or one was 4, one was 10. The commanding officer overrode me. And these, we didn't have surveillance, like a video feed at this time in Afghanistan, but it was flat surface without any contour lines on the map, and we thought our guys were going to be killed. And they would have if they didn't get inside this canal, and thank God they were. Just 2 weeks ago, I was taking their platoon commander in this platoon that got blown up by the commanding officer to the airport for him to go fly overseas. He's still in the Marine Corps. Incredible leader. But the commanding officer dropped a 500-pound bomb and then fired 2 surface-fired rockets, these HIMARS rockets, 675 pounds each. Fired them in an open sheath formation that spread the damage out, and these guys are still 34 meters away from the enemy. It's just very reckless. But my point in saying that is, even though that, I was exonerated, you can't just say, well, I can't be on the skyline anymore. I've talked to a lot of Marine officers after what I've gone through, and it's like, your role as a leader is to absorb the heat. When the pain's coming down, you can't duck and throw somebody else under the bus. And that's what happened in our case several times, but you have to stand and absorb the heat. And to me, I stood up to the commanding officer, said we can't do this, explained specifically what happened twice to him very explicitly in a timeline. And when you're in command, egos can get in the way. Egos are a very dangerous thing. And if you are in power or in command, it's, Lucifer fell because of pride. That's ego. And it's a very, very dangerous thing to not have control over and not have someone to bounce an idea off of. And if that's unregulated and uncontrolled, it's usually going to lead to your eventual downfall.
Yeah, no doubt. Going back to your trial, I've never been through what you went through, but as a cancer survivor, I know what it's like to face something that, an enemy, if you will, that could possibly kill you.
Life-threatening.
Right? It's life-threatening. But I also know, with my faith, that faith without works is dead, right? But faith works.
Yes.
Like, it actually is highly functional. And I know when I was diagnosed with that, you never expect to hear the words from a doctor, I think you have cancer, right? And when you hear that, it kind of stops you in your tracks, like, whoa, this is for real. But I do know that my God just kind of locked eyes with me at that point, and it was amazingly vivid how real and how interactive he became in my life at that time. Did you experience the same kind of thing in combat? And then 2, did you find that trial spurred that sort of spiritual awakening, if you will, or close relation with the Almighty?
Yeah, definitely. And it was this resurgence. It was before, during, and after, and very important. I say that before H mission, like I previously mentioned, that was the start. That was the very first thing I did. Even when there was very limited time, I would take the time to seek the Lord and be in front of Him, and He heard our prayers.
Yeah.
In combat, I knew, as the Bible says, He goes before us.
Yeah.
He's beside us.
Yeah.
He is all around us.
Yeah.
And He totally protected us in countless times. When we came back, not just in the trial, and that's why the Bible, when I read these, about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fire, and having a fourth man in the fire, He's there. Also, after the trial was over, even the second trial, and my military defense attorney said, Fred, the conviction rate, if you go to a court in the Marine Corps, conviction rate's 96%.
Wow.
The next highest in the world is 92%. People's Republic of China, not necessarily known for their human rights. Jeez. So you're going up against very poor odds. We don't fight battles when we know that 96% chance of loss. Yeah. And like during the first trial, they had 45 criminal investigators and 4 prosecuting attorneys against the 7 of us, 7-to-1 odds. And then myself and one other Marine officer who I'll meet tomorrow. We've been friends since 2006, close brother of mine.
Yep.
It was he and I, the 2 of us in the trial. So 49 against 2. But God was there. And afterwards, you start understanding like the odds and the probability of all this, of actual living through it. But one thing God was working on afterwards especially was healing me from things that, like in childhood, the forgiveness, of my father.
Yeah.
And that's for your own good. Mm-hmm. So it was so important for me at that time because, I came back from combat and I had time, and I was on the staff. They're trying to overwork me because they really wanted to find something, just like the stories of Joseph, with Potiphar's wife. They want to, even if you're righteous, they want to try to find something even after you clear these trials.
Of course.
So they put you in the training shop where there's a nexus to training, and they can find some kind of gotcha. And they didn't, and I'm not trying to I'm just trying to say during that time, I wasn't deploying. I was in the operations staff at the 3-star general's headquarters. But I had the time, and I know God, especially on the weekends when I had the weekends off, He would work with me and heal me. And that's something like right now, I know there's a lot of guys that haven't had that healing.
Yeah.
And they're searching in areas that the world's telling them, hey, this is cool, this substance, whether it's alcohol, heavy booze, pills, medications, and sometimes the VA is doing this, and it's a cocktail mixture of booze, recreational drugs. Some people are going down and getting treatment who knows how it's really regulated, but it's dangerous and it's killing a lot of Marines. And this summer in 2024, there was a lot of guys that I'd served with that ended up killing themselves. And these are people that literally shouldn't have. They were at the end, they had retired from special operations. They had families. Their life was perceived to be, on easy street then, and they ended up getting entangled and enslaved in these chains of alcohol and substances and killing themselves. And that's what's really led us to be here right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you talk about veterans and active duty struggling, transition, especially into civilian life, right?
Right.
But based on your experience, what advice would you give those who may be facing these difficulties, a difficult time, whether it's vocational, they're addicted, they're injured, right, and dealing with all sorts of orthopedic injuries or the like.
Yes. Without going too deep, I've mentioned there's like 6 steps before the actual 7th of suicide. And it's not just the individual that could be going through something like that. When you're a buddy or a spouse or a parent or a friend, you have to be able the one that takes action and throw them that lifeline. When you start seeing a severe psychological issues, even though they're getting treatment, orthopedic issues, anything that involves medication, especially if there's alcohol with that and or any other drugs, that usually leads to decreased performance. They may not have the same type of job where there's that purpose, and that can lead to a depression. They tend to isolate themselves. These are the steps I'm talking about that usually lead to someone just being so miserable and feeling that the best hope is killing themselves. And I'll tell you, anyone that thinks that way, that is not the option to choose. There's people that love every single one of these people. But sometimes that noise, especially if they're hooked on substances, it's so loud and there's
just
so
amplified
much,
by them.
It's so much pain that they can't hear. They may feel guilt and shame. And that's where we need to come in. And just like in the missions I mentioned to you before, one of the missions we call legacy mission back in the 90s that we used to do is the in extremis hostage rescue, the rescue at the point of death. And that's where these guys are. They are enslaved and they're not in full control. And somebody's going to kill themselves. That's not something that a person in full control wakes up out of the bed in the morning and wants to do that.
Yeah.
But they're enslaved. They're held hostage to this. And that's what our job is, to go and at the point of death where they could do it to themselves and rescue them, because there is hope, there is restoration. You can be healed from all of this.
Absolutely.
And have an incredible life. And I've seen success stories. We know Ossie Fagan, and there's others, but some people feel hopeless, they feel ashamed, and they may have done things that they're ashamed of with their family, and they feel that guilt. But God can heal that.
Absolutely.
And some things may change. It may not be the exact perfect picture, but just like with Job, what was taken away was restored.
That's right.
And multiplied.
That's right. So Fred, we've talked, about how many veterans are struggling to transition back into civilian life. Are there any specific experience or connections that have stood out to you in terms of how others have supported you, or how you've been able to support others?
Yes, and so much support. And I've had family, like my direct family, my extended family, people who were your friends and loved ones, just constantly praying for you. And that allows miracles to happen. That was I could tell you stories all night about just how God protected us, and it's not again from like how I was doing something so super secret, but it was the power of God, and it was from prayers that I made, prayers that family and friends made. And that's I know just recently we were praying for a brother of ours, and just today he let me know right after I walked out of his office, like, hey, this miracle happened. Prayer works. So, some people don't pray. Some people don't believe in prayer. I'll tell you, somebody who has lived through fires and trials, fires in battle, trials in courtroom that you weren't meant. I mean, the largest employer in the United States, if you took the number 2 and number 3 employers by head count, Amazon and Walmart, and combined them, it still wouldn't be as large as the Department of Defense, active, reserve, National Guard, civilians, contractors, and by far they're the most lethal. And the odds were way against us, but that's because God was on our side in prayer and His work.
That's right. So I know faith has been just a significant part of your life. You've talked about how your faith has influenced your journey, both in your military career and just with all the various challenges that you face. But what are some specific moments or scriptures, other than Psalm 9 and 91 that we already talked about, that strengthen you during these difficult times, or they continue to guide you now?
Okay. One in particular, that's a good question. Thank you, because it's something I would reflect on constantly, even now to this day. Not everything goes right. I've never seen a unicorn, or I live in Hawaii, so there are rainbows, but it's not a perfect world that we live in.
Everybody faces adversity.
Yes. And just like you mentioned, fighting through cancer, sooner or later, everyone will have a crucible moment in their life or with a loved one's life that really shatters them, that can break them. And that's where the Almighty God can, be present in your life if you seek Him. And one of those scriptures is in Revelations 4, and it's the throne room of God. And it's just amazing where John is revealed the heavens, brought into the throne, and sees the glory of God. And just there's descriptions of colors of God's throne room are beyond the imagination.
Yeah, they don't exist here.
It's something. And so when I think of, I was doing this today, and in some times, like Paul said, it's a bit selfish to just, want to check out and go home to paradise. And, living in Hawaii where, it's paradise, I realize there's bigger, more important things, which brings me here today. You have to think, and luckily, I went to this Catholic high school that they had several sayings. Septina in Christo was wisdom in Christ. Another was men for others. And they raised us with this, and we had to sign on the top of our papers, AMDG, for ad majorem gloriam Dei, for the greater glory of God. And if you have that mindset that your life is for God's glory, that you are men or women for other people, and you're not focused on yourself, that's, we are created to worship God, to allow other people to experience,
to relate with Him, right?
And to experience the salvation of God, and to be able to also worship the Lord. And so that's what I think about. And things are difficult. You cannot, as I mentioned before, like in this Mountain Leaders course, they taught us, you can't go internal. That is a lie of the enemy, is how does it affect you? And you start feeling self-pity and how it relates to you instead of what's going on with these other people. I mean, I remember one thing from my older sister, she'd say to me, like, don't we have anything better to do when we were little kids? And we'd bug each other. And it's true, like, as grown adults, we do have something better to do. And that is to help other people out.
Yeah, to love on people.
Yeah, hey, how are you doing? And check up on them. And it's just great, this organization that's founded because of tragedy. And, now we're going out and
encouraging, restoring, and healing.
Encouraging, but first being invasive, like, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Getting any attention that you may have on yourself to other people.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a critical component to well-being and happiness, understanding that our healing comes in the healing of others.
Exactly.
It really does. Like when you're depressed, when you're struggling, when you're dealing with adversity, when you focus on others, it's kind of interesting. Yes. You find that you're actually healed in doing that. Like we are helped by helping others, and it's an amazing experience. So a lot of with hooks, and especially with your military background, we're on a daily basis. We're speaking to people who are dealing with PTSD. They're struggling with that. They're struggling with TBI. They're dealing with all sorts of these challenges that they're coming to, or that they're experiencing after service. Based on your experience, what message would you offer to someone that may be struggling with these issues right now?
That there are so many people that care about them, and they have seen and experienced people who care about them, but sometimes our memories as Americans are very short, and we lose track of that. Just like how often as Christians we can forget things that God has done for us, repeated things that, just like the chosen people walking through the desert after leaving Egypt, and they had all these visual, experiential, firsthand miracles occur, and then they give up hope. And one thing I would say is, get in touch with Hooks of Hope, and that's we want to be your first lifeline.
Yeah,
you get in touch with us, and what else? There's some people right now, hopefully, that are listening to this that are not going through a crisis, but can give their time. They can be the captain of a ship, literally, if they're a commercial captain. They can help provide food. They can donate their time or their money. And right now, at this stage, this is a critical resource and a shortfall that we really need to help others. And as you and I have gone to so many of these Marine Special Operations units and different units, they have people identified and are waiting to be scheduled, and we cannot do it without other people. So I say to the people who are having a crisis, get in touch with us. We will find a way. Yep. I say to the people who are not in crisis, who are listening, who have the financial wherewithal, get in touch with us. We, as Uncle Sam said, we need you.
That's right.
We need them, everybody, so bad. And we're so appreciative of organizations, institutions, and individuals. That one thing I found about Americans, and I've been in part of a lot of nonprofit organizations, and they're just the benevolence, the caring, the generosity, and seeing what it does for people. And I've seen this as I've showed you pictures of, children, Gold Star children that 10 years later after receiving a scholarship, where they are now. It really is life-changing. And that's what Hooks of Hope's, we are going out to save these guys. They're literally held hostage. And we're going to go deal with the enemy through the power of God and break down these chains and rescue these people, get them out of the enemy's territory, and
get them connected and plugged in,
and save their lives.
Yeah, we really, one of the things I see again and again and again as we help people, and the more people we meet and run across that are dealing with these issues, is they're isolated. They're living in isolation. They're alone, and or they think they're alone in what they're dealing with, and they're not. And there's it's amazing how the lights can come on when they realize that they're not supposed to be fighting this alone, and they're going to fight it, they're going to have other people there to help support them and walk them through this journey, to connect them with counseling, with people that actually specialize in the soft community or specialize in the military communities and dealing with PTSD, not just them, but their families. Because when whatever they're going through, their family's going through it too.
Yes.
Right? They're not doing this alone. But then also mentorship programs, getting them connected with local churches, getting some of this stuff off their mind, getting them to one of our fishing events, getting them on a boat, getting them on a sailfish or a mahi or a marlin or a tuna, yellowfin tuna, whatever it happens to be.
Yes.
It's there's a tremendous healing power that can come with the outdoors, and there's a release, right? And there's a connection, especially like with one of the advantages of fishing, and most guys are and we're not isolated. Like Hooks of Hope is not in any way, shape, or form isolated to treating men. It just happenstancely in the veteran community. It just happens there. It's a
higher.
There's a higher propensity
suicide for men.
That's true. There's a higher propensity of suicide for men. But we tend to open up shoulder to shoulder, not really face to face, and we also tend to do it while multitasking. And fishing, in particular, outdoor activities, it's a tremendous way for us to get people out there, to be able to kind of get them to start opening up to us, to help us get at the real root of what their problems are, to be able to connect them with real solutions and help get them plugged into real solutions to deal with those problems. And again, not just them, their families as well. So it's a super important thing.
And one thing on that, John, is when people get in that stage where they feel isolated, that's, if you know somebody that's in that stage or you're in that stage yourself, help is mandatory, because that's one of the, as I described, these 6 steps, that's near the very bottom, and there's a way out of that, but it takes intervention. You have to have a lifeline. And some people, the steps before that where they're lied to and they get this depression, and they have some guilt, and they just feel like not confident. They may have done something to themselves or their family where they feel this guilt and shame and fear. This can turn around.
Absolutely.
But once they get to that isolation stage, that is a major stop all event. We have to get them help. And people may be listening to this right now that think like, hey, I'm kind of in this stage. Maybe I'm depressed, or now I'm actually isolated. And we have programs. We can do coordination for resident programs where the people feel enslaved and like they don't have the strength to break the addictions. That is not true. That is possible. We can get them the help. We can get them into programs that will treat them and allow them to get completely sober and dry and clean. So despite what some people think, don't listen to that lie. I'm telling you right now, we are here, and we will help you get out of these dark places.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you're a key part of Hooks of Hope as a director and a member of our board of directors. What impact do you envision for the veterans and service members and the families that we support?
This is an incredible opportunity because these types of problems that veterans are having, especially those in the combat arms field, specifically some of those in special operations who've been really exposed to many blasts that have impacted their soft tissue in their brains, that has changed their psyche. It's changed their physiology with multiple orthopedic injuries. And I'm going to get to answer the question here, but I just want to give some of this background because they're not the same people. And I've had my family tell me this, like, you're not the person that left Kansas at 17 years old. You used to be happy, laughing, in the life of the party. You had all these friends. And I'm living proof that you can get your own life back. And we have regenerative medicine that can totally change your life. We have Christian counselors. We have fellow veterans that want to help you. We have volunteers. All these people are working for you. And you have to trust me when I'm saying I don't ever pull any punches and embellish. We're here to change your life and help save you and bring you back to that restoration so that your wife, your kids, that you may have some shame and some guilt about, this can be restored. You may not believe that there's a way, but we will do everything we can to allow this healing and restoration to start and to be complete. In my life, so many bad things have happened, from divorce and from mental exhaustion and pushing yourself so far and not being able to find work. I mean, I've applied for literally over 800 jobs, and it is very challenging because I was labeled in the media as a mass murderer. And at that stage, with that professional destruction, it's almost impossible. But I'm saying that's when God can step in and show when, somebody that wants to do it on their own and beat their chest, it's really hard, unless you let God, solve these massive problems which you don't think he can. I'm telling you, he solved them in my life and so many other people's lives. And I'm excited to get started with you and others to allow this type of healing and restoration to happen.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, his goodness is endless and his ability is infinite, to want to. So if you're feeling isolated, if you're feeling alone, you're dealing with these issues that we're talking about, contact us. If not us, contact there's a myriad of organizations out there that offer services to the veteran and active duty populations. You don't have to struggle. You definitely don't have to do it alone. There's a lot of organizations out there that can help you. Make sure you take the first step in doing that. Don't wait. There's no reason to. So, Fred, a lot of folks are probably wondering, what they can do to get involved. I mean, what would you recommend to our listeners here on how they can get involved with Hooks of Hope and our mission?
The best way is to go to the website and fill out a contact form. We've both seen this and had, just like a firefighter or special operations, like a time-sensitive target mission,
Yep.
We will respond immediately, and we will get you that help. We will reach out across the network and get people who are in crisis the help they need. Those who want to support, those who want to donate, there's the ability to do it at www.hooksofhope.org.
Yep.
And you can volunteer, you can donate, you can contact us if you need help, and we will immediately go to battle stations and get you the help you need.
Absolutely. Fred, thank you for sharing your story with us, your faith, your resilience, and your courage. They're inspiring, man. We're incredibly grateful for your willingness to participate in Hooks and speak to those who are still finding their own path here. Your message is a powerful reminder that hope, healing, and purpose are not only possible, but they're also available to us all. So thank you again, man, and Semper Fi.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.